The team head to the northeast to check out the location of a well-known thylacine sighting. Did Tony Jarvis see a thylacine crossing the road?
So what's the lowdown here? What's the story about this spot here?
So Bill, we've come to just outside Scottsdale. We need to go back to the 4th of June 1991. Scottsdale taxi driver Tony Jarvis is returning from a trip from Launceston via Lilydale to Scottsdale. About 15 minutes outside of Scottsdale, he comes around this corner just in front of us. 200 metres in front of him, he sees standing in the middle of the bitumen a Tasmanian tiger. Sees the black stripes clearly. It's standing in the middle of the road.
It'd be about here.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
The tiger is eyeing that bank in front of you.
Yeah.
Right. Tony continues to drive. He's got a quiet automatic car. He gets within 50 metres of this particular tiger.
So it's still just standing here.
Absolutely. And he eyeballs it for 45 seconds. 45 seconds.
Right, that's a good sight. Yeah.
Absolutely. Before the tiger heads up into the thick bush in the bank across the road.
And jump this fence here.
Yeah, well, I'm sure would have been able to do that quite easily.
Well, if this was like this in the 90s, which is quite possible it was, it could have just scrambled, ran down this way.
I think if Bill, with his age, can jump that fence, a Thylacine's going to be able to do it pretty easily.
Well, that sounds more credible than most.
Absolutely. I think the great thing about this particular sighting is it was really the start of a series of sightings in this particular area, and it meant that a lot of property owners were actually writing to Harry Holgate, the minister at the time, saying that the government should be out here doing a full-time investigation. This particular sighting also got a lot of press involvement because Nick Mooney, the wildlife biologist working for Parks at the time, was conducting an investigation, and all of the results were being put into the paper. So there's lots of newspaper articles that reflect the investigation.
I seem to remember that. I seem to remember that there was a lot of bad things said about Nick being pessimistic and being a skeptic.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nick copped a lot of flack because essentially he was doing his job. He had to be a skeptic and look for proper evidence. And unfortunately, despite all of the reports, there was no hard evidence that was discovered. This is before we had the automatic cameras that we have today, so they really didn't have those sort of facilities. And if you look at the substrate in that area over there, even with the best of intentions, you know, you're not going to get a clearly defined footprint for any animal, let alone a thylacine.
No. Well, I just walk there, you can't see my footprints.
Yeah, absolutely, and you weigh slightly more than a thylacine, one would think.
Just a little bit,
just a little bit. So, Bill, what would you think about this actual habitat for thylacine?
It looks pretty good to me. I mean, I don't think it would have changed much in 20 years. We've got sort of open areas, fairly dense. Just having a look. Looking around for droppings. We've got lots of rabbit droppings and stuff here. By the looks of it. Well, as far as habitat goes, I mean, the thing with thylacines is we assume that, like a lot of predators, they could just be passing through an area anyway. But we've got forests, we've got animals. A lot of it's plantation stuff, so quite possible a lot of that could have been just 1080 and knocked out a lot of animals there.
Yep.
Oh look, the cars are That's why we're on a road trip.
We're on a road trip.
Yeah, so At the time, they used to 1080 everything, which would have wiped out a lot of wildlife. So whether that there looks probably around about the time, so probably pre-planting that, there could have been a lot of wildlife here. It's just a policy back then. So a lot of wallabies, things that eat wallabies. So yeah, I would sort of say it's possible, it's feasible that it could be Thylacine country. It's also feasible, even if it's not, that they could be passing through.
Yeah. So the other thing that's interesting about this particular sighting, Bill, it's in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
We think of the thylacine as a crepuscular animal, more active at dawn and dusk. Is it feasible that you have this top order apex marsupial carnivore active during the day?
And it's this time of year.
Well, it's this time of year, it's winter.
Okay. In Tasmania, yes. Especially highlands and the western side, you'll see wombats, you'll see things right out in the middle of the day. The reason for that is that they're not nocturnal because they don't like the light, they're nocturnal because they don't like the heat. When you think of a marsupial, marsupials have evolved in the, well, right down near Antarctica, Australia, moved up, everything got hot. The way to cope with that is to come out at night time. If it's cold, they don't need to come out at night time. They don't pant, they don't sweat like a lot of the other animals do. So yeah, so to cool off, they just have to be in cold climates. So yeah, no, very feasible, I'd say.
Yeah. And in terms of the whole sighting sort of situation here, you've got this guy rounding this corner in a quiet automatic car of the early 90s, a taxi as well. He's 200 metres from us, he sees this animal and he's able to get within 50 metres of it and observe it. And 50 metres to me, that's probably on the verge of the maximum distance that you're going to be able to see any detail from an animal that size, I would have thought.
I suppose so. You want to mark out 50 metres and see?
Absolutely, so we'll do that.
Count.
I can't see any stripes.
Oh, damn.
Okay.
Yeah, this thylacine hunting, yeah, it's a pretty good gig.
Feasible that you would have seen a good sighting from about here?
Yeah, absolutely actually. So if you just separate your fingers for me, Bill. Yeah, I can see the spaces between your fingers. Yeah, clearly you can see your finger definition. In fact, I might just walk.
Definition?
I can see the beard definition. Let's say he's not very good at estimating distance. So keep your fingers splayed. Yeah, so now it's starting to get a little bit.
I'm probably not good at judging distance, but you look like about 100 metres away from me.
Yeah, I'd say that's 75 to 100. So this is halfway between the bend and where the animal is. And it actually looks like a good place for an animal to cross, So this area, northeast Tasmania, a lot of thylacine history, Bill. I think it's time that we go and have a look at another famous thylacine incident in northeast Tasmania.
Let's go for it, yes.
In 1953, Bert Maher allegedly catches a thylacine in a trap. Intrigued by the conspiracy theories surrounding this notorious incident, the team head to Springfield to investigate.
We're here in Springfield to chase up an old sighting or an old thylacine story going back to 1953. Mr. Bert Maher, he was a trapper and he had set a trap and he had caught what he believed was a thylacine. When he came to the trap, the undergrowth and the ferns were all torn up around. There was this animal and he had to stun it, which means whack it on the head with a stick. And then what he did was he skinned the animal. According to some reports, there's conflicting reports. Some say that he threw the body away. Others say that he took the whole carcass home. However, it's interesting that he got another local bushman to come and examine the animal, and they measured the dimensions of the animal. It says it's 4 foot and 3 inches long, which is it's a very small thylacine, and 2 feet high. So now they say that they looked at the body, they examined it, and they then concluded it was a spotted tail quoll. The authorities concluded this, but the bushman and Mr. Bert Maher, they thought it was a thylacine. Now look at the dimensions. A spotted tail quoll, yes, easily 4 foot long, but only probably about 1 foot high. Wouldn't be 2 feet high. 2 feet high, we're now looking at something much more like a thylacine than a spotted tail quoll. So I'm finding that really interesting. Later on there's a news report that basically says yes, it was just a tiger cat, not a Tasmanian tiger. The spotted tail quoll is often referred to as a tiger cat. Really don't know why. It hasn't got any stripes. The only thing I can think of is that the face looks very much like a thylacine. The other interesting thing is around this area they say that there were footprints at the time which they believe was thylacine, and these were up to 5 inches. That's way too big for a spotted tail quoll, and it's even too big for a Tasmanian devil. They could have misidentified dog prints, or they could have misidentified wombat prints because of the 5 claws, but certainly not a spotted tail quoll. So, Woz, what do you think about all this thylacine trapping and bodies going missing, and then other ones saying the quolls? And
yeah, the Bert Maher sighting from 1953, Bill, is probably one of the first conspiracy theory type thylacine sightings where the government, the G-men, the men in black come in and take over the investigation. And it's pretty interesting. I think in one part of me, I think it's almost hard to believe that an experienced bushman and a trapper who's physically putting their hands on an animal and then taking it away or clubbing it or whatnot is going to misidentify a thylacine versus a large spotted tail quoll. Then the other part of the story of the government coming in and basically threatening Mr. Maher with sort of prosecution if he tells the story about the fact that this is a thylacine versus a spotted tail quoll. Good story, but is it real? Are both parts of it real? Has Mr. Maher made up the story about the government side of it, to save face? They've actually come in and said, no, that's a spotted tail quoll.
Which should make you feel like a bit of a Burke.
That's right, because all the papers at the time were covering the story and making bold claims. Tiger found, government to investigate carcass, those sorts of things. So, yeah, it's interesting. But again, the flip side of that is, if the government did want to keep it quiet and to stop people going out there looking for it, this is the 50s, so this is 65 years ago, so there'd be plenty of people who would still want to go out there and hunt these animals, that of course a plausible story would be misidentification and keep it quiet for your own sake and for the animal's sake.
I guess so, yeah. It's I find it a bit odd. I suppose that sort of thinking, I suppose you would sort of want to try and keep it safe. I'm trying to think if I was a government official and you got some sort of hillbillies, killed this animal, and you sort of worried, there's going to be more in their hills that want to kill those animals, would you actually lie to the public and say that? Or, it's really hard to say, that one.
I think the times need to be considered. So this is pre-internet, pre-social media, where these types of secrets are far easier to keep. I think in this day and age, when it comes to conspiracy theories, I'm far less likely to believe them, because everybody's got a mobile phone, they can take photos, they've got Instagram, Facebook, those sorts of things. So if the government's to make a statement, it's far easier to contradict that with some sort of a photographic evidence. In those days, you know, you basically had the local newspaper and the telegraph and the phone. You know, it's 1953. It's not. It's less than a decade past sort of World War II, when, you know, the public were told, you know, the old loose lips sink ships, all those sorts of things. So in that side of it, it's far more believable. It was a bit of a drive to actually get in here. There's not a lot of services as it is. So it's, you know, 65 years ago, it's going to be even more remote.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, it's pretty remote now. Yeah, no, it's an interesting idea that yeah, perhaps the times, and also I think we're looking at a time with science where, you know, you got these clever fellas who are like the priests of the new religion of science, that you just don't, if they say something, well, it must be right, you know. I think that was quite often the attitude, especially post World War II, where science really just, technology came to the fore. It sort of made scientists almost like this, you know, final word of authority. And so if a scientist says it, it must be true. So I guess science had that power to say, okay, no, Spotted-tailed quoll, rack off.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we need to take into account during our, you know, investigations, you know, we've found some pretty good indicators that thylacines may have been around till at least the 1980s. So given the habitat in this particular area, I think it's very plausible that there were still thylacine in this area in the 50s.
The very fact that he was trapping meant that there was animals here to trap, which means that thylacines would, you know, have a food source. You can hear that there's water running in this area too, so, you know, it's got streams running through, there's water. We've got mountainous areas which would have denning sites for thylacines. I think this whole area is probably a really good spot for thylacines. And then again, you know, nobody's really debunked the large paw prints.
Yeah.
You know, we can't investigate them, but, you know, at the time, the large paw prints, we could say, well, okay, it wasn't a devil and it wasn't a quoll, if it was the same animal at all.
Yeah, well, that's right. And I think, though, the other thing with that is that given the time frame, you'd think that the people would be more likely to positively identify a thylacine in terms of, you know, it's only sort of, you know, 25 years since the last one died in the zoo, so there was living memory of thylacine.
It's living memory, but there's also ignorance as well. It's not like they're in all the textbooks. People would probably have to go to Hobart or somewhere like that to see the coat of arms. Yeah, it's probably not as much like now. You go almost in every town, you'll see thylacine images everywhere, you'll see sculptures everywhere. At the time, probably not as much, which is interesting. They called the other bushmen in to sort of identify it. But still, if what's said is true, if they took those measurements, it's more likely thylacine than quoll.
Yeah. At least the juvenile one.
It'd be a juvenile one, yeah.
All right, so let's continue our journey on. Great area, great story. I think we think it's plausible, but I guess we'll never know.
True. Damn government conspiracies.
The government.